This is Audible.
Divine Domination, bought by the Billionaire, Book 4. Written by Lily Valente. Narrated by Summer Roberts and Tyler Dunn.
Chapter 1. Ian Hawke. The kid didn't stand a chance. That's what people said about Ian when he was a little boy, growing up in the projects of inner-city Chicago, hiding under the bed while his mother turned tricks to keep the heat turned on and a needle in her arm. That's what they said when he came to school wearing the same dirty sweater for months, when the lice infestations got so bad the school nurse was forced to shave his head, when he grew more and more withdrawn until most of his classmates couldn't remember his name. But what no one realized was that Ian was different than the other lost and forgotten children. He was special, the 1 in a million person who could live without love or kindness and who bounced back stronger every time the world knocked him down. Later on in his life, the words sociopath and psychopathic tendencies would be bandied about by social minor things he wouldn't have known existed without his swift, clever hands. As he grew older, his criminal proclivities expanded. He learned to hunt for wallets and expensive clothes and pretty girls, the kind who wouldn't give him the time of day if they knew where he'd come from and all the terrible things he'd done. He hunted drugs to sell, weapons to defend himself, and enough money to escape the neighborhood and to make his dreams come true. But then, days after his 18th birthday, Uncle Sam stepped in and changed the course of his life, drafting him into the first tour of duty in Vietnam. Uncle Sam put an even bigger, better gun in Ian's hand, money in his pocket, and, most wonderful of all, gave him free rein to kill. And kill he did. Ian slaughtered the enemy with impunity and was happier in the dark, bloody jungle than he had ever been before. He was finally at home, in a place where monsters like him could run. Ian had a true friend, a brother in arms, and a brother of the soul. Mason understood what it was like to look out at the world and realize there was nothing to be afraid of. They were the predators, the top of the food chain, the masters of their blood-soaked kingdom. But nothing beautiful lasts forever. Children grow, love dies, and wars end. Mason was pulled out in 1973, near the official end of the war. Ian followed 2 years later, escaping in one of the last helicopters during the fall of Saigon. He'd served 6 tours of duty without serious injury, but as the helicopter lurched into the sky, he took 2 bullets in the leg, the shots fired by someone in the mass of South Vietnamese crowding around the embassy, desperate to be evacuated before the North took over. He was recuperating in a military hospital in D.C., mourning the loss of the life he'd known and wondering if he would ever find a place as perfect as his terrible. "No, I don't want them written out of the will," he said in a harsh whisper. "I want them out of the picture, permanently, and I want you to be the one to do it." "Why me?" Ian asked, keeping his expression neutral. "Why not keep it in the family? We both know you're capable." "I'll also be the first person the authorities will suspect. My alibi has to be airtight. While you're getting the job done, I'll be attending parties in the city, skiing upstate, and making sure I'm never near my brothers and never alone. But if I'm caught, it could still lead back to you," Ian said, his mind already clicking through possible assassination methods. "I wouldn't say who hired me, but we served together. There are records." "You won't be caught. That's why I'm here, because you're the best." Warmth softened Stuart's usually cool blue eyes. "You're my real brother, and if you help me, neither will you, as long as you keep your word." Mason smiled, a hard curve of his mouth. "I'm ambitious, but I'm not a fool. You'll get everything you've been promised, and more." "I don't need more," Ian said. "Half is enough." And it would have been. $1.5 billion would have made his wildest dreams come true. But on the cold December morning, when Mason was named the sole heir to his father's vast fortune, the money never came. Ian's bank balance remained steady. Not a penny more, not a penny less. At 3 o'clock, he called Mason, but there was no answer, only a busy signal that droned in his ear, summoning the rage bubbling inside of him closer to the surface. At 5 o'clock, he drove by the row house in the elite part of D.C. where Mason had lived since he began his work as a lobbyist, but the house was empty. A glance in the windows revealed that the furniture was gone and the floors bare. Even before Ian returned home to find an envelope slipped beneath his door, he knew he'd been cheated. The message the missive conveyed confirmed it. If you talk, you'll go to jail, and you'll go alone. There is no paper trail, no money trail, nothing to prove you weren't acting on your own. This is your chance to walk away. Take what you've been given, make a life for yourself, and don't attempt to contact me again. If you do, you die. I've hired security, and they've been instructed to shoot on sight. Goodbye, and good luck. The note was typed with no signature, nothing to point to Mason. Ian wasn't surprised. Mason was as careful as he was greedy, and had enough money to hire a small army to protect him. If Ian tried to take his revenge now, it would be a suicide mission. It would take time for his former friend to drop his guard, time that would be best put to use in planning and preparation. Ian was a patient man. He was also a determined one. He might have lost the battle, but he would win the war. By the time he was finished with Stuart, cheating a hawk would be his greatest regret. And now, just days from his 65th birthday, his moment had finally arrived. He'd failed once before, but now he had his hands on the only things Stuart truly cared about. He had one of Mason's daughters locked away in a remote location in the Florida Keys, and he had the other on his private plane looking up at him with frightened blue eyes, the exact shade as his father's. As for what I want, Ian settled onto the small leather couch next to Hannah Mason's seat, close enough to smell the grass and perfume scent drifting from her body. I want your father to pay his debt. If he does, you will be allowed to live. Hannah swallowed, and her taut features relaxed, making it obvious she had no clue that he was talking about so much more than money. No amount of money could right Mason's wrongs. There was only one way to even the score. Mason would pay his debt with the blood of his children, the keepers of his legacy. What good was an empire, after all, without someone to pass it on to? Money could be replaced. Not so little girls. And Hannah and Harley were the last living Masons of their generation. Ian had already taken care of their cousins, those tragically unlucky men and women he'd orphaned when they were so very young. I think he'll choose you anyway. Ian smiled at the pretty thing peering up at him, not surprised his son was smitten with her. Hannah was beautiful, with a sweet heart that shone in her eyes, and a brightness of soul found only in the very young and very breakable. She was one of the fragile, gullible victims of the world fools like Jackson couldn't resist taking under their wing. Eva piped up, waving a hand at Jackson before turning back to her son.
It's too long and Hannah in trouble. You work together, help her, then you fight.
The seemingly sincere concern in the older woman's voice reminded Jackson of his other source of information. The one person he trusted wanted nothing but the best for Hannah. I'm calling her aunt. He snatched the phone up with one hand as he pointed at Dom with the other. Get my cell from the floor in Hannah's room. As soon as I'm finished with this call, I have to place another one. Then we'll talk. He should probably call the Titan group first. He doubted Alexander Titan would initiate an execution based on a text message, especially since they'd never discussed the price for murder on demand. But Hannah was his first concern. He would do what he could to keep Harley safe, but only after he found out who had Hannah and was on his way to getting her back. Sybil answered on the third ring, saying,
Hello, darling. Is everything all right?
In a sleepy voice. A glance at the clock above the stove revealed it was nearly midnight. Jackson had been so terrified he hadn't even noticed the time. "No, Sybil, it's not. This is Jackson, Hannah's friend," he said, wincing at the last word. He was so much more than her friend. But her aunt had never met him or seen him and Hannah together. She might not trust him enough to open up about their family secrets, but he had to try for Hannah's sake. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but something terrible has happened. Hannah's been taken by 2 men, one of whom I thought I could trust with my life."
Oh, my God,
Sybil whispered. "I realized she was missing and followed them, but it was too late," he continued, knowing he didn't have time to waste explaining all the finer and crazier details of Hannah's abduction. "I got to the airfield in time to see their plane take off. My
turn on him."
She paused before continuing in a haunted tone.
"And now Stuart has spent the past 40 years defending his family from a nightmare that he set in motion, knowing his connection to the murderer would be obvious if anyone ever learned the man's name."
"You could be right," Jackson said, his throat tight. "I'm going to look into a few things, Sybil. I'll call you back."
"I'll come to you," Sybil said. "My friend Hero is a pilot. He says he can borrow a plane and get us both there in 90 minutes. When you figure out where they've taken Hannah, we'll come with you."
Her friend Hero. Jackson was tempted to tell the woman her trust was grossly misplaced, but resisted the urge. Hero had been his spy, but he'd also said he cared about Sybil and sounded like he meant it. If there was one thing Jackson had learned from his time on the island, it was that
At her neck, the feel of his teeth against her skin ratcheting her desire up another notch. "I'm many things, sunshine, but I'm not a liar." Hyperbole isn't a lie. She fought the urge to squirm as he turned his attention to the other side of her collarbone, and fresh heat pooled between her legs. It's an exaggerated statement, never intended to be taken literally. "I appreciate the grammar lesson," he said dryly, "but I wasn't exaggerating. Do you want me to prove it?" "No," she said, tightening her grip in his hair. "I'd rather you fuck me, sir, if that's all right with you." He laughed softly as he moved on top of her, spreading her legs with a nudge of his knee before settling between them, pinning her against the warm wood of the deck. "I think I could be persuaded to fuck you, if you're a good girl." "Or a bad one?" She lifted her hips, grinding into the hard, hot ridge of his cock, still trapped beneath his swim trunks. He cursed against her mouth. "Well, I do." He kissed her other shoulder, making her ache for the feel of his weight settling on top of her. But he held himself away, taking his time trailing kisses up the back of her neck. "No bruises today. You're too beautiful. All your sun-warmed skin and that white tan line on your ass. I've been dying to get you out of your swimsuit all day." "You should have said something sooner," she whispered, shivering as his fingers wrapped gently around her throat, urging her to tilt her head back and push up on her forearms. "There's no one around to see. We could have gone sailing naked." "Sometimes delayed satisfaction is the best kind." His fingers trailed down her throat to skim the top of her breast. "Don't you think?" "How are you holding yourself up with one arm?" she asked, breath coming faster as her nipples pulled tight, aching for his touch. "I want to feel you." "I want to feel you, sir," he corrected, but there was amusement in his voice. So relieved to be granted permission to move, even just a little bit, that she danced a few feet away from the razor's edge, regaining enough control that she was able to remain still when Jackson brought the tip of his cock to her entrance. It rested lightly at her opening, enough for her to feel how hot and hard he was, but not enough to grant her even the slightest bit of relief. All she wanted was to lift her hips and shove backward, impaling herself on his erection. She wanted it so badly her inner walls pulsed and her body gushed wetness onto the blunt head of his cock, desperate to ease his way. But instead of pushing forward, he rocked his hips slowly from side to side, teasing first one side of her opening and then the other, while his fingers continued to twist and pluck at her nipples, and Hannah slowly went out of her mind. "God, please, Jackson," she panted, tears rising in her eyes as she fought the overwhelming urge to move. "Please, please." But first, he was going to make her father choose between the daughters he'd sacrificed so much to protect. Depending on how things played out, this could be the last sunrise Hannah would ever see. "No, he won't get away with this. You'll find a way out, and you'll take Harley with you." Hannah swallowed hard. Ignoring the lingering taste of her own sickness in her mouth and the acrid scent rising from the blanket she'd thrown over the puddle of vomit, she glanced around the cabin. Jackson's father was nowhere in sight. He and Adam must both be in the cockpit landing the plane, which meant she was alone for a few precious moments, and she meant to make the most of them. Flicking open her seatbelt, she lurched out of her seat, clinging to the back of the seat behind her, fighting the drag of the G-force as the plane continued to decelerate. She pulled her way to the rear of the cabin, to a large desk that occupied most of the space near the bathroom, and snatched the slim gray phone from its cradle, sagging with relief when she heard the buzz of the dial tone. She'd noticed the phone last night, but under Ian's watchful eye, there had been no opportunity to attempt a call for help. Now, she had at least a minute or two before the men finished landing the plane. Hopefully, it would be enough. Quickly, she punched in the familiar phone number and waited with held breath as soft clicks drifted from the receiver, signaling that the call was trying to connect. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes with her free hand as her brain sparked and hummed, waking up fast as adrenaline dumped into her system. She couldn't believe she'd fallen asleep with Ian sitting across from her, watching her like an animal he couldn't wait to slaughter. It must have been a defense mechanism, a way to cope with the stress induced by sharing air with a predator. Whatever kindness Jackson possessed, he'd clearly inherited it from his mother. Based on their few hours of acquaintance, Hannah was willing to bet that Ian Hawke was a prototypical psychopath, a creature utterly without empathy or remorse. But she didn't intend to stick around to confirm her diagnosis. She was going to get away from Ian, even if she had to reach out to one monster to be saved from another. She couldn't believe that Jackson had anything to do with her abduction. The tortured note in his voice as he'd called after her had been too real. Finally, after several more clicks and a long, vibrating silence that made Hannah's stomach sink with dread, the phone rang, just as the plane slowed to cruising speed. Hannah's fingers tightened around the receiver as she spun to look over her shoulder, praying that Jackson would answer before his father came back through the cockpit's door. He picked up halfway through the second ring. "Who is this?" Unexpected tears surged into Hannah's eyes, her throat locking tight as a wave of relief and longing swept through her. No matter what he'd done, it was so fucking good to hear Jackson's voice. "It's get to do this." Hannah glared at him, rage sweeping through her like a hot wind, banishing her fear. "You don't get to decide whether Harley or I live or die." "But I do, sweetheart," Ian said breezily as the plane pulled to a stop. "And there's nothing you or my son can do to stop me. By the time Jackson finds out where we are, one of you will already be dead." Adam emerged from the cockpit, and Ian turned to him with a wave of one hand. "Escort Hannah to see her sister, and then meet me in my office. We're moving up the timetable. I want to have this finished before lunch." Hannah balked at the words. The man wanted to get the murdering out of the way so he could enjoy his noon meal. If she'd had any doubts that Ian was a psychopath, or beyond the reach of appeals for mercy, they would have vanished at that moment. A wave of sickness tightened her throat, but there wasn't anything left in her stomach.
fighting for something more important than a shipment of illegal arms or a good price on his latest black market investment. He was fighting for Hannah's life, and her sister's too. If his father killed Harley, Hannah would never forgive him. He had to make this right. He had to think 6 steps ahead and be waiting for Ian when he turned the corner. He was off to a good start. He'd already learned that Stuart Mason, his father, and Alexander Titan of the Titan Group had served in the same squadron in Vietnam. Therefore, he also knew that he couldn't trust the intelligence he'd received from the Titan Group or hold on to his previously held beliefs about his father. The realization had led him to dig beneath the surface, deeper into Ian's past. Turns out, Ian Hawke wasn't the last living member of a Texas oil family, the way he'd led everyone, including his wife, to believe. He was a thug who had grown news of their arrival from Ian as long as possible and hopefully gain entrance to the house unnoticed. He refused to think about what would happen if his guess were wrong and the home was empty. He wouldn't think about how much time that would waste or what might happen to Hannah while he was scrambling to locate whatever snake hole his father had crawled into. He had to trust the intelligence he'd gathered and have faith that he was on track to saving the woman he loved. But faith was harder to hold on to when he was alone. With Hannah, it had begun to feel natural to wake up in the morning believing he would continue to become a better man, one worthy of her good heart. Now, as he drifted into a fitful sleep, he wasn't sure what he believed. The only thing he knew for sure was that if his father killed Hannah, hers would be the last murder he would live to commit. Jackson slept, dreaming of a sweltering battlefield where he hunted his father through a blood-soaked jungle. See if there's anything I've overlooked. Jackson took the phone from Dom's outstretched hand, surprised to find their argument had made him more confident in depending on the other man for backup. Stuart Mason could be paying this man more money than God for all he knew, but money couldn't buy loyalty. Adam had taught him that. Knowing that Dominic cared about Hannah enough to start an argument with someone nearly twice his size made him trust that the man would do whatever he could to get Hannah to safety. Now they just had to get there in time for him to eliminate the threat to Hannah once and for all. Dom didn't have to worry. Jackson was ready to do what needed to be done. As long as Ian Hawke walked the earth, Hannah would never be safe. It didn't matter that her father had likely committed a crime worthy of a heaping helping of revenge. The moment Ian had started killing innocent people in his quest for revenge, he'd proven that it was time for him to be put.
Staring into the eyes of her missing piece. Hannah's breath caught, and pain flooded through her, leaving her entire body feeling bruised. There she was, rising slowly from the window seat on the other side of the room. The sister who had once been like a part of her own body and soul. With her hair bleached blonde and her skin a pale, creamy shade that bore testament to how little time she must spend in the sun. Harley looked different, but there was no doubt it was her. Hannah held her sister's troubled gaze, her gut twisting with love and regret and a fierce, bittersweet nostalgia, but the familiar rush of affinity never came. This woman was no longer her other half. Jackson was her other half, and if she hadn't come into his life when she did, the man she loved would never have found his way out of the hell Harley had consigned him to. "I'm sorry," Harley said, her eyes to pretend to be her sister. They didn't have time to waste catching up. They had to find a way out. But she had to know one thing first. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why did you frame an innocent man?" Harley crossed her arms at her chest, pulling the thin gray sweater she wore tighter across her shoulders. "God, Hannah, I don't know. It was all so messed up. If I could go back and undo it, I would. I swear I would." "That's not what I asked," Hannah said, her voice cold. I want to know why. Did you even have a reason? Or did destroying a man just seem like a fun way to spend the summer? Her sister flinched. I know I deserve that, but I promise you, I'm not that person anymore. I hope I have time to prove that to you, to prove how sorry I am. She wiped the last of her tears away with her sleeve. As far as the other, I convinced myself ruining Jackson was fair play. An eye for an eye. Someone I loved for someone he loved. Hannah frowned. Jackson loved you. Not Jackson. His father, she said. Ian Hawke was the one who took Mom away, Hannah. He's the one who broke her. What? Hannah frowned, but understanding clicked into place before Harley could respond. You mean he was the man Mom had the affair with, when we were kids? She nodded. Now I know seducing Mom was all part of Ian's obsession with evening an old score with Daddy, but I didn't back then. Harley paced toward the 2 leather couches in the middle of the room and stared into the empty fireplace. I just knew he was the man who'd ruined our family, so I decided to ruin his. Hannah shook her head. That isn't justice, Harley. Jackson was innocent, completely. At least Mom went with Ian of her own free will. Jackson was just... I know that, Harley said, her pitch rising as she spun to face Hannah. Believe me, Hannah, I know. I fucked everything up and ruined people's lives and proved I was every bit as evil as that man who plans to kill one of us. She stepped closer, until only a few feet separated them before continuing in a softer voice. And I swear, I would give my own life if it would make it all right again. But it won't. The only thing I can do is move forward, trying not to do any more harm. Her tongue slipped out to dampen her lips. And that's what I've done, and why I have an enormous favor to ask you. A favor? Hannah's breath huffed out. Considering I might die today, Harley, I don't think I'm in a place to make promises. You're not going to die, Harley said, a resigned look in her bloodshot eyes. I've had a few days to think about this, and I seriously don't see Daddy choosing me. He knows you deserve mercy more than I do, and I think a part of him would like an excuse to bring Jasper to live with him. Hannah's brow furrowed, but Harley pushed on before she could imagine who Jasper might be. He thinks it would be better with a boy, easier or something, but he's wrong. Harley's lip curled. He'd get tired of Jasper the same way he got tired of us, and I can't stand for my son to grow up that way. Hannah leaned back against the door, her knees suddenly unsteady. Harley had a child? A little boy, who would be left without a mother if their father chose to spare Hannah's life instead of hers? Harley threaded her hands together in front of her. That's why I want you to take him, Hannah. I don't know if you have kids, but I don't, Hannah said, the admission sending another wave of pain through her chest. Her dreams of love and family had disappeared, along with her other dreams, on the day her sister had died, and she'd learned she was a hunted woman. But they'd come back, with Jackson, for a stolen moment in time that was likely all she would ever know of romantic love. Harley's expression softened. Well, I have no doubt you'll be an amazing mother, and I know you would love Jasper like he was yours. He's such a good, smart, sweet kid, just like you were when we were little. And I've told him all about you, so he won't be shocked to see someone who looks like me. She paused, tears rising in her eyes again, before she added, I think it would give him comfort, really. And maybe someday he wouldn't even remember the difference between his first mom and his second one. Jesus. Hannah closed her eyes, sagging more heavily against the door. Her thoughts raced, even as her pulse slowed, until her hands felt like lumps of ice at the ends of her arms. Please, Hannah, Harley begged, her voice even closer now. I know it's a lot to take in, but... Dad's not going to choose me, Hannah said, forcing her eyes open. She couldn't fall apart now. Not when Harley had basically confirmed that the only way she was getting out of here alive was if she managed to escape before Adam returned. He won't take Jasper's mother away from him. If it comes down to making a choice, you'll be the one walking away from this. Harley shook her head. Have you forgotten who our father is? He's not going to care about taking me away from Jasper. He'll convince himself it's for the best. If I'm dead, then Jasper won't have to hide. He'll be able to come back to the States and live like a prince and start kindergarten next fall where the kids speak English. It's everything Dad's wanted for the past 5 years. For the past 5 years. Hannah's gut churned as she quickly did the math. Harley's son was 5 years old, getting ready to start kindergarten, which meant she must have gotten pregnant that summer 6 years ago, which meant Jasper might be Jackson's. Jackson could have a son. It was a painful realization. She didn't want to think about Jackson having children with another woman, especially her sister. But it was also a reason to love the little boy even more. Jasper might be more than her nephew. He might also be a piece of the man she loved. If something happens to you, I will take care of Jasper, Hannah promised, knowing it was the right decision as soon as the words left her lips. I will love him like he's my own and do everything I can to give him a happy life. Harley's shoulders sagged. Thank you, Moo. Thank you so much. But let's make sure nothing happens to you, or to me, she said, motioning toward the window as she crossed the room. How do things look outside? Are there guards who will notice 2 women climbing out a window? I haven't seen any guards, Harley said, following her.
Hannah was being strained. Soon it would snap. His gut kept screaming that he was minutes away from losing her and that every second counted. The thought was barely through his head when a loud pop sounded from inside the home, echoing across the water. It was a gunshot, followed quickly by a second and a third.
Hannah. Adam blindfolded them before pushing them out into the hall. There they were forced to fumble along with their hands on the wall and then to cling to the wooden handrail as they descended the stairs. They were halfway to the first landing when Hannah heard Harley stumble behind her and turned to snap at Adam. We've already seen the house. I don't see the point in the blindfolds unless Ian's decided he wants us to die from falling down the stairs. Mr. Hawk wanted you blindfolded, Adam said, in his usual low, disaffected voice. You always do what the Hawks tell you to do? Hannah asked, not afraid of the gun in Adam's hand. He wouldn't shoot them. Not until his master gave the signal, anyway. I do what the highest bidder tells me to do. Your father had the chance to pay up and make this go away, but he thought I was bluffing. We can pay, Harley piped up from behind her before Hannah could figure out what to make of Adam's claim. If he were telling the truth, what did that mean for her and Harley? If Ian wanted money in addition to one of their lives, would their father give it? Stuart had always been generous when it came to his daughters, but maybe blackmail changed things. We've both got trust funds, Harley continued, and I've made money on my artwork. Just let us go and we'll give you everything. Too late for that, Adam said with a sniff. But I'll do what I can to make it painless, whichever one your father chooses. You're a fucking prince, Adam, Hannah sneered, shocked by how much she wanted to wrap her fingers around the man's neck and squeeze the life out of him with her bare hands. And soon, either she or Harley would follow. Or maybe he'd shoot both of them, no matter what he'd told her father. She hadn't had any experience in a hostage situation before, but her gut said that if Ian had his way, he would be the only one leaving this room alive.
Jackson. The moment Dom pulled the boat within 5 feet of the dock, Jackson jumped out and ran. He wasn't worried about stealth or secrecy anymore. Gunshots had been fired. 3 of them. Harley and Hannah could both be dead. Or maybe Harley, Hannah, and Adam. If Jackson knew his father, He wouldn't allow a traitor to live. It didn't matter that Ian couldn't have taken Hannah without Adam's help, or that his father had committed enough sins to thoroughly blacken his own soul. Ian had no tolerance for betrayal. That was why Hannah was here. Her father had dared to betray a hawk, and now he was paying the price for it. No, she's here because of you. You led Ian right to her. If you hadn't been such a vengeful bastard, Hannah would still be safe on her island with her aunt. Vengeful bastard, just like his father. As Jackson ran around the side of the house, bent double to stay out of sight of the ground floor windows, he cursed himself for growing up too much like Ian Hawke. If he hadn't been a madman bent on revenge, his father wouldn't have the woman he loved held at gunpoint right now. He had to believe that Hannah was still alive. He couldn't admit that he was probably too late, or he would start screaming and never stop. He couldn't lose her, not now, not because he was 5 fucking minutes too late. He was rounding the front of the house when he heard his father's voice and froze. He glanced over his shoulder, motioning for Dom, who was quickly gaining on his head start, to stay quiet before jabbing a finger to the open window above him. "Now that you understand how serious I am, Stuart." Ian's voice sounded like he was facing away from him, but Jackson couldn't be sure. Slowly, he moved closer to the window, ears straining. "You have 2 minutes to decide which of your daughters will live," Ian continued. "At the conclusion of 120 seconds, I will make the choice for you." Jackson's heart lurched into his throat. Hannah was still alive, but in less than 2 minutes she wouldn't be. There was no time for the diversion he and Dom had planned or to chart another course of action. He had to take advantage of the element of surprise and hope he could take his father down before he killed Hannah. Pulling the gun from his pants, Jackson met Dom's eyes and nodded toward the window. Without missing a beat, Dom motioned back around the house before drawing his own gun and hurrying back the way he'd come. Dom would cover the window on the other side of the room. If Jackson missed, hopefully the other man wouldn't. Slowly, Jackson stood up far enough to peer into the room, his stomach clenching when he saw Hannah and Harley on the other side of a large wooden desk. His father stood in front of the desk, his back turned to Jackson and his attention directed down at the open laptop beside him. "Please, just give me a few more minutes." Stuart Mason's voice emerged from the computer. "I haven't spoken to either of the girls in years because of you, Ian. At least give me time to say goodbye." 100 seconds, Ian said, proving his utter lack of compassion. But then, he knew he was on a timetable, and he wasn't one to waste time indulging other people's emotions. His emotions. His rage, his jealousy, his avarice were all that mattered. All that had ever mattered.
Shoulders hunching toward her ears as the glass shattered with another boom, boom, and a crystalline ringing that sliced through the air. Ian staggered backward, clutching his chest, just as a third shot sounded from the other side of the room. Acting on instinct, Hannah tackled Harley to the ground, rolling across the carpet as the window near the fireplace exploded. "Run!" she shouted as they untangled themselves, urging Harley toward the entrance to the room. She had no idea who was shooting at the house, but they needed to get out of the room before they were caught in the crossfire. "Stay low. Find somewhere to hide. I'm right behind you." Harley scrambled out of the room on her hands and knees. Hannah was following when she caught a flash of movement out of the corner of her eye. It was Ian, lurching toward the window with his gun in hand, aiming at something outside. She came to her feet in the shelter of the doorway, standing on tiptoe until she could see the lawn outside and the wounded man sprawled on the grass. She couldn't see his face, but she recognized the shape of Jackson's body instantly. Her heartbeat stuttered, and the blood in her veins turned molten as something primal inside of her responded to the sight of the blood staining his shirt with a roar of fear and rage. He'd been shot. His father had shot him in the chest. And now, unless she did something to stop him, Ian was about to finish the job of murdering his son. The realization hit. A second later, Hannah was in motion. She surged back into the room, her thoughts racing even as time seemed to slow, giving her a few precious seconds to think. As she rushed toward Ian, she snatched her discarded blindfold from the floor, wrapping it tight around her hands as she closed the last of the distance between them and leapt into the air. She landed on the desk, skidding across the smooth surface on her knees to collide with Ian just as he lifted the gun and fired. His arm jerked down, sending the shot. She turned to see Jackson round the corner and lean heavily against the doorway, clutching his right shoulder. He was grimacing and pale, with sweat beading on his forehead and blood streaming through his fingers to form tiny rivers that flowed down his left forearm. But he was alive. He was alive, and the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She hurried to his side and tucked herself beneath his uninjured arm, gratitude rushing through her when he hugged her close with his usual strength. "You shouldn't be standing up." "You're okay?" he asked, his pained gaze scanning her face. "He didn't hurt you?" "I'm fine," she said, swallowing hard. "But your father's dead." Jackson's eyes flicked to where his father lay on the hardwood floor, a small puddle of blood forming beneath his left shoulder. "Your shot started it, but she finished it," Dom said. Subtext in the words Hannah couldn't understand, but Jackson seemed to. "Good." He met the other man's gaze before turning back to her. "He would have killed both of us if you hadn't. Don't doubt it for a second. You only did what you had to do." "We need to get the bleeding stopped," Hannah said, anxiety pricking at her skin as blood continued to seep from the wound near Jackson's shoulder, soaking his shirt. "Come on, let's get you settled in the dining room." "I'll find Harley," Dom said. "She has her pilot's license. She might be able to get us out of here before the cleanup crew." "That would be great." The thought sent a wave of relief rushing through Hannah's chest. She wasn't surprised that Harley had acquired another exotic skill set. Her sister had always been a fan of acquiring new hobbies, especially ones that cost obscene amounts of money. "The sooner we can get Jackson to a doctor, the better." "We'll land at the airstrip near your father's house," Dom said, moving away down the hall, as Hannah guided Jackson into the dining room. "He'll have a doctor waiting who won't ask questions." Hannah's breath rushed out with a curse. "Are you really okay?" Jackson asked softly. "I'm understanding what a cleanup crew is correctly, right?" she asked, suddenly acutely aware of the acidic taste flooding her mouth. "People who clean up murder scenes so the bad guys don't get sent to jail?" "Except this time they're cleaning up the murder scenes so the good guys don't go to jail." Jackson grunted as he sat down on the edge of the heavy oak table and let Hannah help him lift his legs so he could lie down on top of it. "Or the good woman, anyway," he added, paling as she wadded the blindfold into a ball and pressed it to his bullet wound. "You don't deserve to go to jail, or even trial for this. It was self-defense." "I wasn't thinking about myself," Hannah said. "When I saw you lying on the ground and your dad going in for the kill shot, I just lost it." She shook her head, the dazed feeling still hanging around her head like a protective fog. She was grateful for the way it softened the edges of what she'd done, making it okay to push the sight of Ian's slack features from her mind. "I didn't even think about what I was going to do. I just did it." "I understand. You were protecting what's yours." Hannah held his gaze, her throat tightening as she searched his eyes for a sign that everything was going to be okay. "Are you? Still mine? Even though I ran away and nearly got us both killed?" She rushed on, cutting him off before he could speak. "I know you didn't give the order to kill Harley. I know it was a trick now, but I should have suspected that from the beginning." Jackson's lips curved in a humorless smile. "It's not your fault. I didn't tell you that I'd put my people back on her trail. I should have. He paused, finding her hand with his. The same way I should have told you that I love you, long before last night. Yeah? The lump in Hannah's throat swelled until she could barely breathe. Yes. Jackson squeezed her cold fingers. I love you. And it shouldn't have taken almost losing you to make me realize I never want to let you go. Tears rose in her eyes, and the numb feeling began to fade, replaced by an overwhelming mixture of fear and relief that made her voice break as she asked, Never? Never, he said, without a hint of hesitation. I'm yours, for as long as I'm on this earth, and I hope you'll be mine. Of course I will. She smoothed his hair from his forehead before pressing a kiss to the sweat-damp skin. I can't wait to be away from all this and know you're going to be okay. I'm going to be fine. He shifted, wincing as he moved his injured shoulder. Don't worry, I've been in worse shape than this, lots of times. Hannah swallowed, willing her tears away, trying not to show how much the blood soaking the cloth scared her. Well, hopefully Dom will be back with Harley soon and we can get going. She nibbled her lip, dread knotting in her stomach, as the reality that Jackson and Harley were about to set eyes on each other for the first time in years fully penetrated. I know you're still angry, and you have every right to be, she continued. But I talked to Harley, and I believe she's changed. That doesn't excuse what she did, not even a little bit, but It doesn't matter, Jackson said, with a small shake of his head. I don't care about her. You're all that matters. You and me. Hannah's mouth trembled, caught between a smile and something guiltier. Well, anyway, I believe she's sorry at least, for what she did to you. Because she had a child, maybe your child, and it changed her. Love changed her. That's Harley, isn't it? Flying the plane? She left us here. Dom dropped his gaze to the floor. Looks like it. There's no one else on the property, and I couldn't find her anywhere. Hannah cursed, while Jackson laughed, a humorless sound that transformed to a groan. Fuck, it hurts to laugh. Then don't, Hannah said, her voice sharp with rage. There's nothing to laugh about, and if you die because she ran away and left us, I'm going to hunt her down and kill her myself. Jackson tightened his grip on her hand. No. No more hunting. No more revenge. She glanced down at him, her anger fading a few degrees when she saw the love so clear in his eyes. We're going to get out of here, he continued. I'm going to heal, and then you and I are going to make a life together, away from all the crazy people in our lives. Yes, she whispered. That's all I want.
And crossed the room to his bedside, taking his hand as she perched carefully on the mattress beside him.
How do you feel?
All right, he said, his voice rough with disuse. Pretty good, really, considering. How long have I been out?
Almost 2 days,
she said, worry clear in her eyes.
You lost a lot of blood. Thankfully, my mother was a match, so the doctor was able to do a transfusion not long after we landed.
I'll have to thank her. He glanced around the room, not sure how he felt about recovering in what he assumed was Stuart Mason's home. Stuart's money and connections had no doubt saved his life, but if Sybil's suspicions were correct, the man had also hired Ian to kill his own brothers.
No, you won't,
Hannah said, her tone brittle.
She wasn't happy about it. She wanted to let you die, but I convinced her to do it. For me.
I'm surprised to hear about Ian's relationship with your mother, but I'm not surprised I was a target because of something he'd done. I'd thought of that before, that one of his enemies might have assumed the best way to ruin my father was to destroy his only child. He glanced down at his wounded chest, his lips curving in a bitter smile. Harley obviously didn't realize that Ian couldn't have cared less if I lived or died. Hannah brought his hand to her lips and pressed a kiss to his knuckles.
I can't wait to get out of here.
She glanced over her shoulder before adding in a softer voice,
I don't trust Dad. He's been nothing but helpful and sorry, but it's clear he's not a fan of our relationship, and I can't shake the feeling that there's something he's not telling me.
About what? He asked, wondering if Hannah knew about Sybil's suspicions. He didn't imagine so, or she wouldn't be able to speak her father's name without horror in her voice. She shook her head.
I don't know. I feel like it's something about your dad, or your dad and my mom, something that happened while they were together, maybe. But I know better than to push. If I do, he'll shut down and disappear, and we'll be left alone with Mom and the maids.
Might not be so bad, he said. I'm not in any hurry to meet your father. Hannah's lips pursed to one side.
Oh, yeah? You're not planning to ask him for permission to court me?
I don't need his permission, Jackson said, holding her gaze. I have your permission. Her expression softened.
You most certainly do.
She squeezed his hand.
Dom told me to tell you he's sorry for the things he said on the plane, by the way. He didn't give me specifics. He just said that you were right, and I was stronger than he'd given me credit for.
Jackson grunted. He should have apologized in a soft sob.
I feel so stupid. I actually believed that she was sorry. I bought her lies all over again, the way I did when I was a kid.
Jackson studied her for a moment, unable to shake the feeling that there was something wrong. Something more than you being unconscious for 2 days, her father being a criminal, her mother loathing her new lover, and her sister running off without bothering to make sure Hannah survived, you mean? It was true. Hannah had been through hell, and now wasn't the time to push her about Harley or anything else. If he was going to prove to her that he was ready to let go of the past, actions would speak louder than words. Can you get me a new cell phone? He asked, inspiration striking. Something I can be sure my father's people didn't have traced. Hannah nodded.
Of course. I'll go to the store this afternoon.
You should go now, he said, releasing her hand.
Figured that's Hero's call. I believe he cares about her. If he's decided it's kinder to let the lie of why they met stand, I'm going to trust he has a good reason for it. I know honesty is important, but maybe sometimes it's kinder to give the person we love the gift of ignorance.
Maybe you're right, he said, thinking about Sybil's suspicions about her brother, which she'd apparently kept from her niece for her entire life. Maybe Sybil had come to the same conclusion that Hannah had, that sometimes it was kinder to keep the truth from the people we love. There was nothing to be gained from Hannah knowing that her father might have ordered the murder of his brothers. She obviously already knew that she couldn't trust the man. Learning that he was even more of a monster than she'd assumed would only hurt her and make her wonder how much of that DNA had made its way into her own genetic makeup. Jackson knew what that felt like. He didn't know it needed some time to decide if that's what you really want. Hannah propped herself up on one arm, bringing her face even with his before she said in a soft but firm voice,
Don't even try it, Hawk.
He studied her, admiring the strength in her pretty eyes. Try what?
To get away from me,
she said seriously.
You're where I want to be. The rest of it is just geography.
An unexpected stinging sensation pricked at his eyes, and his voice was hoarse when he said, You're where I want to be too. Hannah's lips trembled into a smile.
Are you going to cry?
No, he said with a sniff. My arm's hurting, that's all. She made a cooing sound, kissing his cheek before she whispered against his skin,
You're the sweetest man in the world. Do you know that?
Jackson grunted. Hannah leaned toward him. For a moment, Jackson was certain he was going to have his way, but then another voice sounded from outside the door. This time, it was a man's voice, and there was little doubt in Jackson's mind who it belonged to. "Hannah, I need to see you. It's urgent," Stuart Mason said, sounding much more self-assured than when he had been begging for more time to say goodbye to his daughters. "There's a letter here for you. I think we should open it together." Hannah sighed, the happy light in her eyes flickering out as she called over her shoulder.
I'm coming. Just let me get Jackson settled with his breakfast tray.
"I'll meet you in the study." A moment later, Stuart's footsteps retreated down the hall. "And a good morning to you too, sir." Jackson's lips curved in a rueful smile. "He seems excited to hear that I'm awake." Hannah grimaced.
I'm sorry.
"It's not your fault," Jackson said. "None of this is your fault."
I know, but I wish things were different. I kept hoping.
Hannah trailed off with a shrug.
I don't know. I guess all the time apart tricked me into thinking my parents were better people than they really are.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Absence makes the heart grow stupid,
she said, tossing the tissues into a small trash can near the bedside table. "You're not stupid," he said in a firmer tone. "I don't want to hear you talk about yourself that way." Hannah looked up, a smile curving her lips.
Yes, sir.
"Go see what he wants," Jackson said gruffly, shocked to find himself stirring again, simply from hearing those two words tumble from her lips. "And then bring me a secure phone so I can start plotting our path to freedom."
Yes, sir,
she said again, with a little salute. Jackson growled. "Don't tease me, sunshine, or you'll be—" Instead, focusing his attention on Miriam, thanking her for the tray she settled gently across his lap. He was already an invalid. He wasn't going to start acting like one of those needy bastards who couldn't stand to be separated from his other half for more than 10 minutes at a time. And he wasn't going to let himself get sucked into creating problems where none existed. Everything was fine. Hannah was safe. The danger to her life had been eliminated, and they had agreed to share their life together for the foreseeable future. All they had to do was get out of this house and away from her parents, and things would go back to normal. As normal as they ever had been, anyway. But he wasn't going to let that bother him either. He and Hannah might not be normal, but they could and would be happy together. He refused to contemplate the thought of anything else.
Chapter 10. Hannah. Hannah took the envelope from her father, frowning at the broken seal. I thought we were going to open it together. I couldn't wait. I was too worried. Stuart leaned in, templing his fingers as he watched her pull the letter from the envelope. And it seems I was right to be. It's from your sister. Hannah glanced up at him, fighting a wave of irritation. Are you going to let me read it, Dad? Or should I just ask you what it says? Stuart's brows crept higher on his broad forehead. I apologize, he said, in a tone that made it clear he thought he had nothing to apologize for. As I said, I was worried. He motioned toward the letter. Please, read. I'll wait until you're done, and we can discuss it together. She took a deep breath as she turned her attention back to the letter, determined not to let her emotions show on her face as she read. No matter how much she wanted to believe the danger had passed, shadowing his future. I hope there will come a day when it's safe for us to be a family again. But until then, know that I am out there somewhere in the big wide world, loving you with all my heart and wishing you happiness. If you've found that with Jackson, then I wish you both well. But don't let him make you pay for the things I've done, Moo. You are your own person, and a better one than I could ever be. The similarities between us are only skin deep, as you know better than anyone. Take care, and may the years ahead of you be happy ones, my sister friend. Never ever. Harley. Hannah pressed her lips together, fighting to regain control of her emotions. The letter left her torn between being touched and suspicious, and hurt and saddened that she'd lost Harley all over again. But more powerful than any of those feelings was the certainty that her father was hiding something bad that Harley had known would cause Hannah pain, something that had made her sister call the father she'd once idolized a sick son of a bitch. Once upon a time, Hannah would have talked around that line. But when she looked up to find Stuart's face set in his usual master of all he surveys mask, she couldn't think of a valid reason to let him off easy. "What did you do?" She set the letter on the table beside her wingback chair, suddenly cold despite the fire roaring in the fireplace near her feet. Stuart sighed wearily as he pinched the bridge of his nose between two long, thin fingers. "Aside from do everything in my power to protect you and your sister? And nearly have a heart attack when I thought I was going to lose one of you?" "Yes," Hannah said, not buying the worried father act for a moment. "Aside from all that." "Stay and hide in a place where you could never find her or Jasper." He sat up straighter, a new stiffness creeping in to tighten his jaw. "That's what I thought," Hannah said, rising from her chair. "Jackson and I are leaving tomorrow, Dad. If you change your mind and want to be honest with me, then I'd love to have an adult conversation about this. If not, don't bother contacting me again, and don't send any spies or people to protect me. I don't want or need your kind of help." Stuart made a grumbling sound. "You absolutely do need protection. As far as most people are concerned, you're the last living daughter of one of the richest men in the world. That will make you a target, Hannah. Ian wasn't the only person after my money, or willing to hurt my children in order to—" "You don't have children anymore, Dad." She ignored the pained look that flashed behind his eyes. "You have me, for now. But if you insist on lying to me, you will lose me too." He blinked, his features softening in a way she had never seen before. But it wasn't regret or love that gentled his expression. It was hopelessness, helplessness, the barren look of a man who had finally realized that the war was over, and he had lost the final battle. No matter how much he might want her to stay, he couldn't or wouldn't let her in. He was trapped inside a fortress of his own lies, and he would remain there, safe but desperately alone, until the day he died. "I did what I had to do," he said in a voice not much louder than a whisper. "There's no point in talking about the past. It's too late for regret. Or forgiveness. You couldn't forgive it all anyway. No one could." Hannah nodded, tears stinging into her eyes, as Stuart settled back into his chair by the fire, clearly resigned to letting his daughter walk away. To the outside world, her father appeared to have it all. Money, power, influence, a beautiful, well-bred wife, and a shot at the presidency if he played his cards right. But looking at him now, all Hannah saw was the shell of a man, a lonely, suffering warning that every dream came at a price. The price her father had paid had been too dear, and it had left him all alone. He would rule his kingdom from a dusty, empty tower room, knowing that everything beautiful in his life had withered and died in the shadow of the dark bargains he had made. Tears slipping silently down her cheeks, Hannah turned to go, wondering how high a price she would pay for her own dreams. She waited until she was down the hall, nearing the garage on the south side where the servants parked, before she pulled her cell from the band of her sports bra, where she'd had it tucked since last night. Dominic,
So he'd let the matter drop. They had time. There was no need to rush or push Hannah to drop her guard before she was ready. They spent the next 3 days reading by the fire and watching the snow cover the valley below their window, but the energy between them wasn't the same as it had been on the island. Before, they'd enjoyed easy silences. Now, something lived in the air between them, an unspoken fear Hannah refused to name. Every time he asked her what was bothering her, she would smile and insist that everything would be better as soon as she knew he was really going to be okay. He wanted to believe her, but couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something that might not be as easily mended as flesh and bone. By the time the snow melted enough for them to drive into town for supplies on Christmas Eve day, Jackson was going stir-crazy and desperate for a chance to prove to Hannah how rapidly his health was improving. They had breakfast at the Four Seasons and then drove to the town square. There, the fresh snowfall made the old West-style buildings look like something out of an antique Christmas card, and strings of brightly colored lights lit up the archway of elk antlers marking the gateway to downtown. Jackson had never been a fan of the holidays. Any holiday. But as he and Hannah stepped out into the brisk morning air, he found himself looking forward to exploring and picking out a few surprises for Christmas morning.
"So where do we want to go first?"
Hannah asked, looping her arm through his and huddling close to his side, though he knew it was more to offer him support than to absorb his warmth. In her heavy white wool coat and white rabbit-skin hat, she was more appropriately dressed for the weather than he was in his thick black sweater.
"The art gallery looks interesting."
"It does," Jackson agreed as he gently detangled her arm from his. "But we aren't going anywhere. I'm going to need
Or need my help. And make sure you're at the Cowboy Bar in exactly an hour, or I'm going to come looking for you, and I'm not going to be happy when I find you."
You aren't happy now. The thought flashed through his head unbidden, leaving him feeling the cold for the first time this morning. She wasn't happy, and he couldn't help feeling like it was something more than his injury causing the sparkle in her eyes to dim. As he kissed her goodbye and crossed the street, bound for a local crafter's store and the jewelry store beyond, he decided it was time to put an end to the weird dynamic between them before things got any worse, and he suddenly had a good idea how to start bringing them back together. Hannah was a strong woman who had proven how brave she was, but she was also submissive. His submissive. She'd given him so much trust in such a relatively short amount of time. She'd abandoned herself to him, trusting in his strength and control, and then he'd been shot, proving that he was flesh and blood like any other man. "No wonder she's scared," he mumbled as he pushed into the crafter's store and was enveloped in a rush of warm, dry air, feeling like an idiot for not sensing the reason for her withdrawal sooner. But domination wasn't only, or even primarily, about flesh and blood. Domination was about power exchange and trust, as much as sex toys and spankings. He might not be able to throw Hannah over his shoulder and tie her up in a sex swing anytime soon, but he could still take her to the place of safety and abandon she had come to crave. He could still make it clear that he was in control and she could trust him with her pleasure and her pain. But you can't promise not to die, leaving her vulnerable and alone. Jackson frowned down at a row of antler bracelets and delicate white bone earrings carved into lace displayed in the case in front of him.
"Can I get something out for you?"
He glanced up, fazed by Jackson's lack of response.
"That's all right. Bones and horns aren't for everyone."
"No," he shook his head. "I mean, yes, you have some very nice things. I'd like to see the earrings, please. The ones on the far left." With a smile that crinkled the edges of her eyes, the woman unlocked the case and reached inside.
"Excellent choice. These are my absolute favorites. It's amazing how Becky can make a little piece of animal bone look like a scrap of lace like that."
Jackson picked up one of the earrings, letting it dangle from his thick fingers, feeling clumsy and out of place. It had been so long since he'd bought a woman a gift, and even longer since he'd wanted her to like it as much as he wanted Hannah to like the things she unwrapped tomorrow morning. He only wanted to please her, but somewhere between losing her in Tahiti and finding her in Florida with her hands creased and red from the fabric she'd used to kill a man, he seemed to have lost the knack for it.
"It's delicate, but still strong,"
the woman mused, studying the earrings from the other side of the case.
"A beautiful contrast."
Delicate but strong, like Hannah. "I'll take them," he said, setting the earring back beside its mate. "Do you gift wrap?"
"Not usually."
The woman's grin widened.
"But seeing as you're in a bit of a bind with that arm and it's the day before Christmas, I can make an exception. Just let me go beg some paper from my friend across the way. Be back in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail."
Jackson nodded, moving off to one side of the case as 2 teenage girls pressed up against it, studying the bracelets. It was true. Bones and horns weren't for everyone. Neither was the lifestyle he and Hannah had chosen. But they could make it work, as long as he remembered to take care of every part of her, the strong and the delicate, the tender lover and the...
In pain, I don't think... I didn't ask what you thought. I told you to take your clothes off and get on your knees. He tossed the bag he'd brought in from the car onto the floor and prowled toward her, a hungry look in his hooded eyes that made it clear he meant business. Or pleasure, rather. This was the side of Jackson that she usually associated with pleasure, the side that could make her knees weak with a look and her panties damp with a single command. But right now she didn't want to play games. She was too worried about him, about the future, and about what Dominic was going to find out now that he'd tracked Harley and Jasper to a village in southern Thailand. Just the thought of her secret calls to her new spy was enough to cool her desire. "No, I don't want to, Jackson," she said, hanging her coat beside her hat. Before she had time to say another word, he was across the wide foyer, his good hand fisting in her hair. She gasped as his fingers tightened at the nape of her neck, her bones melting the way they always did when he touched her like this, like she was his to pleasure or punish as he saw fit. She hadn't realized how much she missed the thrill of danger mixed with seduction until he drew her tight to his chest and spoke in a dark whisper. "You don't tell me no. No is not in your vocabulary when I want you naked and kneeling. Do you understand?" Hannah bit her lip, torn between the lust spreading, hot and thick, through her midsection, and the fear that Jackson was going to hurt himself trying to prove something that didn't need to be proven. She was his. She belonged to him, and they belonged together. And there would be time for the game when he wasn't barely a week into healing from a gunshot wound. "No is in my vocabulary when you're being an idiot," she said, arousal mixing with the anger in her tone. "I'll get on my knees, but you have to promise to sit down and take it easy." "You don't give orders," he said, using the fist in her hair to drag her across the room to the fireplace, proving he had more strength left in that big body of his than she'd assumed. "You don't tell me when to sit still or shut up or stop asking for what I need from you." "Jackson, stop, Her words ended in a cry of pain as she tried to pull away, and he answered her attempt by tightening his grip at the base of her neck. "I'm hurt, but I'm not dying, and I've still got more than enough mental and physical strength left to top you, sunshine." His voice was so deep she could feel it vibrate the tips of her nerve endings, sending a fresh sizzle of desire tingling across her skin, making her nipples pucker. "Now take your clothes off and get on your knees. This is your last chance to have this end well for you." Hannah glared up at him, her breath coming harsh and uneven. She was turned on, there was no doubt about it, and it was clear he was determined to have his way, even if he ended up ripping his stitches in the process. But instead of reaching for her sweater zipper, she shouted the first word that came to her mind. "No!" Her volume was loud enough to echo through the room, but saying it once wasn't enough. Now that she'd started, she couldn't seem to stop. No, no, no! No, Jackson repeated, soft and cold, his control stoking her anger. No, she howled, barely resisting the urge to punch him in the stomach. I said no, damn you, so let me go. No isn't the word you use, he said, again in that completely calm, even tone that made her want to scream. If you want this to stop, you use your safe word. Anything else, I'm going to assume, is a challenge to up my game until you feel safe again. I'll never feel safe, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks, shocking her. She hadn't even realized she was about to cry. And why's that? He pulled her closer, pinning her to the strong side of his body, though she squirmed to get free. Why can't you feel safe? I don't know, she sobbed, overwhelmed by terror and rage she hadn't known she was feeling. Let me go. I don't want to touch you right now. Why? Am I hurting you? No, she snapped, then added with a sob. Yes, now let me go. I'm never going to let you go, he said, vulnerability flickering behind his eyes. You're mine. Your pleasure and pain are mine. Your happiness and sadness are mine. Your fear and hurt are mine. He leaned down, pressing his lips to her forehead, before adding softly, But I can't help you control any of those things, unless you give me the reins, Hannah. She sucked in a breath, fighting to keep her face from crumpling. But I'm afraid, she said, trembling as the truth she'd been hiding from herself came clawing its way to the surface. What are you afraid of? He asked, his voice gentle now, though he didn't loosen his grip on her hair. You said you had respect for life, but not hers, Hannah said, a dam breaking inside of her. You said you would never doom your child to having her for a mother. But what if you did, by accident? What are you going to do? Jackson froze before pulling back to look down into her face. What are you going to do? Hannah choked out between sobs as Jackson's hand slid from her hair. You can't take her son away. She loves him more than anything. I don't know what else to believe about Harley, but I believe that. Jasper is the only thing that matters to her, the only thing she's living for. His lids closed, concealing his eyes, so she had no idea what he was thinking. I wanted to tell you right away, she babbled on, her nose beginning to run. But I didn't have a chance to find out if Jasper was yours, and I didn't want to upset you while you were trying to get better. She sucked in a breath. But most of all, I didn't want to think about you having a baby with my sister. I hated the thought so much I wasn't sure I was going to tell you, even when I knew the truth for sure. She sniffed hard, ashamed of herself now that her secret was out. But I should have been honest with you, even if I didn't want to be. I'm sorry. Jackson's eyes opened, but he didn't look at her. He kept his gaze on the ground as he nodded toward the fireplace. Sit down on the couch. I'm going to bring you something to drink. Hannah gulped. But I don't. Sit down, Hannah, Jackson said, loud enough to make her jump before she backed away to sit down hard on the supple leather couch cushion. She threaded her fingers together in her lap, heart racing as she watched Jackson move across the large open room to the kitchen. The average person wouldn't be able to tell that anything was wrong, but Hannah could read the tension in his movements as he fetched a glass from the cupboard and filled it with water from the refrigerator door. He was upset, most likely angry, too. But her mind couldn't think past the relief coursing through her. No matter how much she dreaded the conversation they were about to have, she was so grateful to sense the miserable distance between them beginning to fade away. She accepted the glass Jackson offered and took a long drink as he crossed the room to the bookshelf and plucked a box of tissues from beside a set of leather-bound classics. By the time he returned, placing the tissues within her easy reach before sitting down on the wooden coffee table facing her, she'd stopped crying and was ready to accept whatever came next. Even if he yelled at her, or shut down and pushed her away as punishment, it would be better than the disconnect of the past week.
"Tell me everything,"
he said, the muscle leaping in his jaw, the only outward sign of the stress he must be feeling.
"Don't leave anything out, even if it seems like something small."
Hannah set her water on the side table near the lamp and took a bracing breath. "Harley and I were locked in a room at your father's house. She thought she was going to die, so she asked me to promise to take care of Jasper, her son, and love him like he was my own. I didn't find out much about him, except that he's 5 and getting ready to go into kindergarten this coming year." Jackson nodded, but his expression remained emotionless.
"So the timeline is right for him to be mine, but I know she was sleeping with at least one other person that summer."
"Right," Hannah agreed, her stomach cramping. "Your friend. And there could have been others. Harley wasn't a big fan of monogamy back then." She tucked her thumbs inside her rolled fingers, resisting the urge to nibble the rough edge of her cuticle the way she did when she was nervous as a child. "I should have asked her who the father was, but I was too busy trying to figure out a way to get out before Adam or Ian came back."
"As you should have been," Jackson said. "Your safety is the most important thing."
Hannah dropped her gaze to the dark jewel tones of the carpet. "But if I'd asked, then I wouldn't have hired Dominic to spy for me or stolen your hair from your pillow while you slept."
Jackson sighed. "For a DNA test, I assume?"
Hannah kept her eyes focused on the floor. "Dominic found Harley and Jasper yesterday. They're in Thailand. He's hoping to have samples of Jasper's hair soon, and the test results not long after."
"And you've been worried that I would try to take the boy away from Harley, if it turns out he's mine?"
"Not consciously," she said, shoulders hunching. "I didn't realize I was worried about that until it just came out."
He grunted softly. "And I thought you were pushing me away because you'd put so much trust in me, and I'd betrayed it by going and getting myself shot."
Hannah glanced up sharply. "No, It has nothing to do with that, Jackson."
"Are you sure?"
he asked, searching her face.
"I imagine it would be scary to submit to someone and then have them prove they're not as strong as you thought they were."
"You were shot. That has nothing to do with strength, or a lack of it," she said, wanting to reach out to him, but sensing he wasn't ready to be touched. "And I didn't mean to push you away. I just couldn't be the way we are together and keep a secret from you at the same time."
"No, you can't," he said. "I can't either. Trust is important in any relationship, but for us it's going to be critical. This is only going to work if we're honest with each other, even when it hurts."
She nodded, pressing her lips together and fighting the tears trying to rise in her eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry."
"It's all right. I'm not in a place to judge,"
he said, running his good hand through his hair, which looked even silkier and shinier away from the island humidity.
"I've been keeping something from you too. Something your aunt told me when she learned you'd been taken."
Hannah sat motionless as Jackson briefly outlined Sybil's suspicions, absorbing the news that her father might have hired Ian to kill his brothers, with less shock than she would have expected. But then, she'd sensed he'd done something horrible, something so dark and terrible that he would never be able to find the other side of it.
"I didn't want you to have to live with that," Jackson continued. "I didn't want you to wonder if there was some part of you, no matter how small, that was like him."
Hannah blinked, shocked by the ping of recognition deep inside of her. "I probably wouldn't have thought of that, at least not at first. But you're right. I will wonder. I guess a part of me already has been." She bit her lip as she shook her head slowly back and forth. "I've changed so much in the past few months, but it hasn't really felt like change. It's felt like the real me, the person I kept hidden for so long, finally stepped out into the light, and sometimes... Hannah hesitated, but then forced herself to push on, knowing if anyone would understand her fears, it would be Jackson. Sometimes that person scares me. He reached out, taking her hand. Energy hummed from his body to hers, filling her with the certainty that she wasn't alone. "She shouldn't scare you," he said. "I love her, even when she makes mistakes." Hannah's mouth trembled. "But I killed a man, and I don't feel bad about it. I really don't." "We killed a man," he corrected, "and you shouldn't feel bad about it. It had to be done. There's a reason my mother hasn't reported him missing or called the authorities, Hannah. My father was a monster who had nothing left to offer the world but more violence and suffering." He squeezed her hand. "Regretting ending his life is a waste of energy you could be using to not keep secrets from me." Her lips quirked at the edges before settling back into an uncertain line. "What are you going to do? About Jasper?" "I don't know," he said, with an openness that surprised her. "I'll wait until we know if the boy is mine, and if he is, we'll decide what to do then." "We?" she asked, brows lifting. "So you're not angry with me?" "No," he said, before adding in a drier tone. "I'd prefer nothing like this happens again, but I'm just glad to get to the bottom of it. I've hated the distance the past few days. You've felt out of reach." "It's not just that." She dropped her head back, staring up into his beautiful face as he clasped the zipper holding her sweater closed and dragged it slowly down. "When my head feels clear, I love the game. I crave it, and don't feel like I've gotten close enough to you if we go without it for too long," she said, voice breathy from a combination of longing and the prickle of fear inspired by being so vulnerable, even with someone she knew she could trust with her most breakable parts. "But when you bring out things in me that I didn't even know were there," she continued, "it can start to feel like I'm out of control in a bad way. Does that make sense?" "It does." He pushed her sweater off one shoulder and then the other. Hannah caught her sleeves with opposite fingers, tugging the cozy knit down until it fell to the floor, leaving her in nothing but her camisole. Immediately, her nipples puckered, the combination of the cool air in the cabin and for all the years, she wanted to love him.
Chapter 13. Jackson. Jackson's breath caught, and his fingers flexed restlessly at his sides, torn between reaching for Hannah and taking another moment to drink in how beautiful she looked.
"Maybe you were right about the other, too."
Her tongue slipped out to dampen her lips as he did his best to memorize the way her skin glowed in the cool winter light filling the room.
"Looking at a man like you, the last thing I used to think about was death. But now, I do. I think about death, and how quickly it can take away everything that matters."
"I think about that, too." Jackson stood, encircling her waist with his good arm, ignoring the dull pain throbbing through his bum shoulder as he hugged her close. "I thought about it the entire flight across the ocean to Florida.
I would never have imagined the first law of thermodynamics could be so romantic."
"It isn't romantic, it's the truth," he said, hand slipping down to mold to the bare curve of her bottom. "Some part of me has always loved you, and some part of me, the best part, always will." Hannah blinked fast, her throat working as she reached up to take his face in her hands.
"What did I do to deserve you?"
His lips curved in a wry smile. "Nothing. Or everything, depending on which me we're talking about."
"There's only one you,"
she said with a confidence that made him believe he would continue to put the darkest hours of his life behind him.
"and I love him, and I need to take his clothes off as soon as possible."
His smile widened. "Immediately works for me." Hannah reached for the strap on his sling as he thumbed open the close of his jeans. A few moments later, she was back in his arms, her skin cool against the burning length of his cock, as they backed toward the couch. She arched her hips as they moved, rubbing against his erection, making him groan as his lips found hers and his tongue pushed inside. He needed to be inside her so desperately his balls felt bruised and tender. But he needed to kiss her everywhere first. He needed to claim her mouth, taste the honey and musk of the skin beneath her breasts, plunge his tongue into the slickness between her legs until he could feel her pussy pulsing around him, flooding his mouth with evidence of her desire. He needed to make love to the backs of her knees and the small of her back and the place at the base of her neck that made her melt when he trapped it between his teeth and bit down.
"Sit,"
Hannah murmured against his lips as the back of his knees hit the couch.
"Let me do the work."
Mouth. Hannah leaned in, her lips parted as if she knew he meant to do something much more thorough than simply kiss her. And he did. He was going to show her who her mouth belonged to. Her lips, her teeth, her tongue, they were all his. Every inch of her was his, and he meant to make sure she knew it. He drove his tongue into her warm, wet heat, fucking her mouth with the thick muscle, plunging in deep and hard until she had no choice but to relax her throat and open for him. She groaned, the sound vibrating their lips as he stroked deeper, his tongue dancing with hers as his grip pulsed on her nipples, pinching her skin between his fingers a little harder each time, until she was bucking into his leg. Finally, she ripped her mouth from his with a gasp.
"I'm going to come, Jackson. I can't stop it. I can't."
"Wait," he ordered, gritting his jaw as he reached down, squeezing her hip tight with one hand while he positioned his cock with the other. "Wait until I'm inside you."
"Yes, please."
She bit her lip, whimpering as he guided his engorged head back and forth through her slick, swollen folds, unable to resist a few more seconds of sweet torture.
"Please, Jackson, please."
"Not yet. Wait for me," he said, circling her clit with his leaking tip, though his balls were suffering, and he wanted to be inside her more than he'd ever wanted anything. But he wanted them both even closer to losing control, so close that the razor edge of their desire would cut away everything that stood between them. "Wait, Hannah. Wait for me." She made a sound that was half growl and half plea for mercy, but held still, waiting for him to give her permission to move. "Look at me," he said, needing to look into her eyes as she known he craved until Hannah had proven to him that love was more powerful than anything that stood in its way.
"I love you,"
she murmured long minutes later, her lips kissing his throat as she spoke. Even in the middle of claiming her pleasure, she had been careful to collapse on his uninjured side, but Jackson wasn't sure it mattered. He was suddenly feeling better than he had since the day he was shot, the bliss of union and release making him wonder if they needed to wait until tomorrow to attend to their other needs.
"And I'm so hungry I feel like I could eat all of the groceries we left out in the trunk,"
she said, her stomach confirming her claim with a long, irritable growl that made Jackson smile. "Then why don't you go grab them?" he said, patting her ass, "and I'll make you something decadent for lunch."
"You?"
She lifted her head, shooting him an incredulous grin.
"You're going to cook for me?"
"I'm an excellent cook," he said with a sniff that she apparently found funny. She giggled, forcing his softening length from inside her, sending a ripple of regret skimming through him and making him even more determined to have her again before the day was over. He hadn't had his fill of her yet, not nearly, but he could wait long enough to prove that he had skill sets beyond those he'd proven in the bedroom. Get the bags, woman. He delivered a more serious swat to her backside, loving that it only made her smile wider. I'm going to make you a lunch that will make your mouth cum. Hannah's eyes darkened.
Is that right?
Her tongue swept out, teasing across her lips.
Is that even possible?
Haven't you learned not to doubt me yet? Jackson said, his blood beginning to simmer all over again. I don't make promises I can't keep. She sobered, a tender expression softening her face.
No, you don't. It's one of the many things I love about you.
She kissed his son he'd never met later. There would be time to sort out where he and Hannah went from here and what to do with his life now that he'd left his criminal past behind him. But the rest of the day was his and Hannah's, and he intended to make sure it was a Christmas Eve neither of them would ever forget.
Chapter 14. Hannah. Jackson couldn't chop vegetables one-handed, but he was excellent at telling her how to slice them to his satisfaction. Big surprise. She teased him about being a control freak in the kitchen as well as the bedroom, but he only smiled and said, "I want the carrots thinner, Sunshine. I know you can get them thinner than that," and returned to whipping up an exotic blend of spices and cornmeal that he said was going to transform his version of chicken and dumplings into something taste bud orgasmic. Hannah kept sneaking glances his way as they worked, a fact he proved as he cooked her an amazing lunch, helped clean up one-handed, and tucked her in for a nap, though she could tell he was interested in more entertaining bedroom activities. But she was exhausted from the stress of the past week and the adventures of the morning, and determined to keep him from putting any more weight on his wounded side until tomorrow morning. Besides, it was the perfect afternoon for a nap. Outside the floor-to-ceiling picture windows of their loft bedroom, a gentle snow had begun to fall, coating the mountains with another layer of white, blurring the edges of the world until it felt like everything outside of their warm cocoon of covers was distant and small. Everything that mattered was right here, lying beside her with his fingers running lightly up and down her back as she snuggled close to his chest and fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep she'd enjoyed in days. She slept hard, soaking in much-needed rest, and woke slowly, drifting back into her body with the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Her skin was still warm from the flannel sheets and her head cradled by her pillow, but when she opened her eyes, the world remained dark. She blinked, her lashes brushing against whatever it was that covered her eyes. She moved to pull the fabric away, but when she tried to shift her arms, she realized what else had changed since she'd fallen asleep. Her wrists were bound together and tied above her head, and the bra and panties she'd worn to bed were gone. She was naked, blindfolded, and tied to the headboard. She was also immediately, mind-numbingly aroused. Her lips parted to call out to Jackson and let him know she was awake, but before she could speak, a large hand covered her mouth, and a rough voice whispered in her ear, "Relax, Sunshine. It's just me." They were the first words he'd ever spoken to her, all those years ago, when he'd made love to the wrong sister and proven there was nothing more right than the way they fit together. And now, they were going to relive that first time, knowing exactly who they were making love to. Hannah moaned against his hand, wanting to tell him how perfect this was, but he kept his hand firmly over her lips. "Remember when I told you I'd do all the dirty things you wanted me to do, as long as you would say you were mine?" She nodded slowly, all of her available senses on high alert, not wanting to miss a moment of what he had planned. "Well, now you're mine," he said. "Are you ready to play?" "Yes," she whispered, lips moving against the rough skin of his palm. "Good," he said, in his deep, delicious Dom voice. "But from here on out, don't speak unless you need to say your safe word." She nodded again, and his hand vanished, the mattress dipping as it gave up his weight.
But not for your skin to go numb. If the pain is too much, use your safe word. If not, keep silent. Now arch your back.
Hannah obeyed, arching into his fingers as he plucked and teased her nipples into tight points, and then wrapped each one in a little knot of torture. But it was delicious torture, the kind that made her nerve endings sizzle and her sex even wetter. She held still for as long as she could, but finally couldn't resist the urge to shift her thighs, restlessly seeking to ease the tension fisting between her legs.
It looks like you're ready for more,
Jackson said, a hint of amusement in his tone.
Spread your legs as wide as you can, Sunshine. We're going to see how you like pain in a more intimate place.
Hannah slowly drew her legs apart, pulse leaping in her throat as she wondered what he was going to do next. Would he tie floss around her down there? And if so, how exactly would that work? She was nibbling on her bottom lip, torn bitterly she wanted release, but not enough pressure to take the edge off.
This is to remind you that even when I'm causing you pain, your pleasure is always utmost in my mind. I know you don't like one without the other, but there are times when you need this more than you think you do. You need to be reminded why you gave me your trust in the first place.
A second finger, or maybe a thumb, she couldn't be sure, found the tight, puckered muscle of her ass and began to exert a similar pleasure.
And I need your submission just as much. Nothing makes me feel safer or more loved than to know you trust me enough to give yourself to me, completely.
His thumb tested her hole, offering just enough pressure to make her aware of how much she wanted him there, too. She wanted him in her ass and her pussy. She wanted him so far down her throat she couldn't breathe. She wanted him to fill her up everywhere, in every way, because he was so exactly what she needed. She pulled in a breath, not sure what she was going to say, only that she had to say something, when he whispered against her neck.
Tell me if this makes the pain too intense.
And he pushed inside her, his thick cock spearing through where she was so swollen and wet. She cried out, a desperate, guttural sound that came from a primal place inside of her only Jackson had ever reached. His thrust stretched the sensitive skin where the clothespins gripped her, intensifying the sting until it hurt. But the hurt was soon eclipsed by the bliss of Jackson sliding home, filling her completely. Her head fell back with a groan.
Yes, sir. Yes, it's too much?
He asked, breath hot on her neck. No, sir, she panted. Not too much. I like it. I love it. I love you.
I love you too.
He kissed her shoulder, a tender kiss that became something darker when he parted his teeth and bit him kiss her cheek tenderly as he removed the pins, the binding on her nipples, and the soft fabric tying her hands before reaching for the back of her blindfold and slipping the knot free. Hannah blinked as she rubbed feeling back into her hands, waiting for the fuzziness to fade from the edges of her vision before she turned to look over her shoulder to find Jackson propped up on his good arm, watching her. Hi, she said, feeling shy, the way she sometimes did when they went somewhere new together.
Hi,
he said, lips curving in a soft smile. Hannah was returning the grin when she saw the blood staining the bandage covering Jackson's bullet wound, and concern swept in to banish the rosy post-scene haze. Jackson, you're bleeding.
I don't care. It was worth it,
he said, still smiling as he caught her arm, holding her on the bed beside him when she would have jumped up to grab the first aid supplies.
Stay. It won't hurt.
That road, do you?
No.
He rested his hand on her ass, giving her an affectionate pat.
But it sure will be fun trying.
She giggled again, so sated and pleasured and content that she was certain she wanted for nothing. And then Jackson said,
Will you marry me, Sunshine?
And she realized that there is always room for a little more happiness. She propped up on one arm, meeting his soft gaze, awed that this was the same man she'd met 2 months ago. He was still strong, stubborn, and determined to have his way. But now he was also thoughtful and caring, and loved her with a bravery that was humbling.
Should I wait and ask again tomorrow morning?
His eyes searched hers, the spark of uncertainty in their depths as sweet as it was unnecessary.
I had something romantic planned involving mimosas, but I didn't want to wait.
He wasn't a stranger any longer. Jackson pulled his hand away with a shake of his head, certain he was seeing things. But then, if Harley could come back from the dead, why not his best friend? Clay. Jackson shook his head again, still expecting the man's features to rearrange themselves into someone else's face. I thought you were dead. I am, as far as anyone who used to know me is concerned. Clay's mouth twisted into a hard smile. I can't tell you who I am now. I shouldn't be here at all, but I owe you things I don't owe anyone else. First and foremost among them, an apology. You don't owe me anything. I do, Clay insisted, because I believed her. I believed that you beat her and frightened her and all the other lies she told. I wanted it to be okay to fall in love with my best friend's girlfriend, so I let myself believe. He turned, staring out at the street, where sweating men on bicycles vied for space with tiny rust-tinged cars. And when I woke up in a hospital 8 months after the crash, I kept on believing for years after I should have realized the truth. There's no excuse for what I did, and I'm not here asking for forgiveness. Jackson started to insist that he was too happy with the way his life had worked out to regret anything that had brought him to where he was now. But Clay turned to him and said, I'm just here to let you know that the boy is mine, and I intend to take care of him. Harley's son? He asked, pushing on when Clay nodded. How do you know? I had a man working on a DNA test, but Harley and the boy disappeared again before he could get a hair sample. I have resources at my disposal not even you can imagine, Clay said, a hint of his old humor in his tone. I know the boy is mine, and I know you've been removed from